Hey, stop scrolling for a second. The billionaire caught his fiancée pushing the maid into the river. 1 second later, everything changed. Nobody saw this coming. Not the maid. Not the fiancé. And definitely not the man standing beside a black car, watching the woman he was about to marry try to end a life with her own 2 hands. What happened in the next 60 seconds would unravel a secret buried for 3 long years. A secret that would destroy one engagement and rebuild an entire family. Welcome back, my friend. If you're new here, I make videos about real, raw, emotional stories, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing who's sitting with me for this one. Today's story is about betrayal, hidden truth, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself with money or titles. It just shows up quietly when it matters most. I won't tell you how it ends. I'll just say this: stay until the final section. You will not expect what's coming. Nobody expected an ordinary Tuesday to become the day everything cracked open. Daniel Reeves was 34 years old, and by every outward measure, he had everything a man could want. He ran Reeves Capital, a private investment firm his late father built from nothing in a garage in Ohio, then grew into a company worth over $2 billion. Daniel had the penthouse in Chicago, the lake house in Michigan, the schedule packed with board meetings and charity galas. And in 11 days, he was set to marry Vanessa Cole, a woman as polished and photogenic as any magazine cover. Everyone said they were the perfect couple. Vanessa was charming at dinner parties, elegant in every room she entered, and always knew exactly what to say to Daniel's business partners. His late mother, before she passed 2 years earlier, had only met Vanessa twice, and each time she'd grown strangely quiet afterward. Daniel never asked her why. He wished now that he had. The Reeves family estate sat an hour outside the city, a sprawling property with gardens, a private lake, and a staff of 12 who kept the place running. Among them was Amara Johnson, 26 years old, who had worked as a housemaid there for nearly 2 years. Amara was quiet, careful, and precise in her work, the kind of employee who noticed things other people missed. She always arrived early. She always left the grounds looking untouched, as if she had never been there at all. But Amara had a secret. Not a scandalous one, a painful one. Her mother had passed away when Amara was 19, and the last thing her mother had told her, in a hospital bed with tubes running into her arm, was a name Amara had never heard before: Eleanor Reeves. Daniel's mother. Amara didn't understand it then. She still didn't fully understand it now. All she knew was that 2 years ago, she had applied for a housekeeping position at the Reeves estate almost on impulse, drawn by a pull she couldn't explain, and somehow she had gotten the job. She told herself it was coincidence. Deep down, she suspected it wasn't. She never spoke to Daniel directly. Staff and family rarely crossed paths beyond a polite nod in the hallway. But she noticed things. She noticed how Eleanor's old study was kept locked, untouched since her death. She noticed a photograph on the mantel of a young Eleanor holding a baby that wasn't Daniel. The age didn't match, the timeline didn't fit. She noticed, once, a folder in the study desk drawer with her own mother's name written on the tab. The one time she'd been asked to dust in there, and the door had been left unlocked by mistake. She never opened it. She was too afraid of what she might find. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other. The wedding planner was on site, string lights being tested along the garden path, tables being measured for a reception that hadn't officially happened yet. Vanessa arrived unannounced, dressed for a photo shoot with a wedding magazine, her hair and makeup already done, moving through the house like she already owned every inch of it. Daniel was in the city, wrapped in back-to-back meetings, unaware of what was unfolding at the estate. He would only learn the full truth hours later, when it was almost too late to stop it. Amara was carrying folded linens down the path near the creek that ran along the property's eastern edge when Vanessa intercepted her. Her voice sharp and low. "You went into the study," Vanessa said. It wasn't a question. Amara froze. "I was told to dust it. I didn't touch anything else." "You're lying." Vanessa's eyes had a coldness Amara had never seen in her before, something underneath the polished exterior that had clearly been there all along, just carefully hidden. "I saw the folder moved." "Eleanor's folder. You know what's in it, don't you?" Amara genuinely didn't. But something in Vanessa's panic told her this was no small matter. "I don't know what you're talking about," Amara said, taking a step back toward the water. "You're going to ruin everything," Vanessa whispered, and there was something almost desperate now beneath the anger. 11 days. I am 11 days away, and you are not going to take this from me." The mini cliffhanger every viewer needed was about to happen, right at the edge of that rushing creek, with no one else in sight. Or so Vanessa thought. Everything looked calm until it wasn't. What Vanessa didn't know was that Daniel had left his afternoon meeting early. A phone call from the estate's head groundskeeper had unsettled him. A strange comment about some tension near the creek path that the groundskeeper couldn't quite explain but felt Daniel should know about. Daniel, trusting his gut more than he trusted explanations, had gotten in his car immediately. He arrived just as the confrontation between Vanessa and Amara reached its peak. From the top of the gravel drive, Daniel saw two figures near the water, one in a housemaid's uniform, one in a bright pink dress that could only belong to Vanessa. He didn't think. He ran. Vanessa's hands closed around Amara's shoulders, and in one sharp, furious shove, Amara stumbled toward the rushing creek, her arms flailing for balance on wet stone. The current there wasn't gentle. Spring runoff from the hills had swollen it into something fast and unforgiving, deep enough in the center to sweep a grown adult off their feet. "Vanessa!" Daniel's voice tore across the field. Vanessa spun around, and for one frozen second, her carefully constructed mask slipped completely. Not fear for Amara. Fear of being seen. Daniel didn't stop to process the betrayal yet. There would be time for that later, and it would come crashing down on him like a wave he wasn't prepared for. Right now, all he saw was a woman losing her footing at the edge of dangerous water, and every instinct in his body moved before his mind could catch up. He reached the bank seconds after Vanessa did, but Vanessa wasn't reaching to help. She was standing frozen, arms half raised, as if her body hadn't decided whether to save Amara or let the current finish what her hands had started. Amara's fingers scraped against a slick rock, missed, and the water pulled her sideways. She cried out, swallowing a mouthful of icy creek water. Her vision blurring as the current spun her toward a bend where the water dropped and quickened further downstream. Daniel didn't hesitate. He tore off his suit jacket and waded in without a second thought, the cold hitting him like a wall of ice. His shoes filling with water. His expensive watch submerged and forgotten. He grabbed Amara's wrist just as the current tried to take her past the bend, hauling her against his chest with a strength born purely of adrenaline, dragging them both back toward the bank. Vanessa stood there the entire time, unmoving, her pink dress bright against the muddy grass, her expression unreadable. When Daniel finally pulled Amara onto solid ground, both of them soaked and gasping, he turned to Vanessa with a look she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not yet, something colder and more dangerous than anger. Understanding. "She pushed you," he said to Amara, though his eyes never left Vanessa. Amara, shaking, coughing water from her lungs, could only nod. "Daniel, it's not what it looked like," Vanessa said quickly, her voice suddenly soft again, the mask sliding back into place. "She startled me." I stepped back too fast, I didn't mean. I watched you push her, Daniel said quietly. With both hands. For the first time since he'd known her, Vanessa had no immediate answer. But what Daniel didn't know yet, what none of them knew in that soaked, breathless moment by the water, was that the folder Vanessa had been so desperate to hide, the one with Amara's mother's name on it, held a secret that would change not just his engagement, but his entire understanding of his own family. And somehow, impossibly, it connected directly to the trembling young woman he had just pulled from the river. That secret was about to come out. And nothing after that moment would ever be the same again. The truth came out when no one expected it. And it started with a single folder. Daniel insisted Amara be checked by the estate's on-call doctor immediately, wrapping his own soaked suit jacket around her shoulders despite the cold clinging to his skin too. Vanessa trailed behind them toward the main house, talking fast, spinning explanations that grew more elaborate and less believable with every sentence. Daniel said almost nothing. He was doing math in his head, the kind of math that made his stomach turn. Once the doctor confirmed Amara was shaken but physically all right, Daniel asked everyone else to leave the room. He sat across from her, still in a damp undershirt. His usual composure completely gone. "What did she mean?" he asked carefully. "About a folder with your mother's name on it." Amara hesitated. She had spent 2 years guarding a secret she didn't even fully understand herself, afraid that speaking it aloud would somehow make it more real, or worse, would get her fired for something she never asked for. But after what had just happened at the creek, silence no longer felt safe. "My mother's name was Ruth Johnson," Amara said quietly. "Before she died, she told me one thing I never understood. She said, 'If you ever need help and you're desperate, remember the name Eleanor Reeves.' I didn't know who that was until I saw the obituary in the newspaper 2 years ago." "Your mother's obituary." Daniel's chest tightened. "You applied for this job because of my mother's name." "I told myself it was coincidence," Amara admitted. "I needed work. This was a real posting. But some part of me wanted to know why my mother said that name with her last breaths." Daniel stood, his mind racing, and walked straight to his mother's locked study, the one room in the house nobody had touched since Eleanor passed. He unlocked it with a key he'd kept in his desk drawer for 2 years without ever using it, and there, in the bottom drawer of the old mahogany desk, sat a folder with Ruth Johnson's name typed neatly across the tab. Inside were documents that made his hands shake as he read them. A private adoption record, dated 26 years earlier. A letter in his mother's handwriting, never sent, addressed to a daughter Eleanor had given up before she married Daniel's father. A daughter born during a difficult, painful chapter of young Eleanor's life that she had never told anyone about, not even her own son. A letter that ended with the words, "I think of her every single day. I hope one day I have the courage to find her." Daniel read the name of the birth mother listed as guardian in the earliest years before formal adoption, Ruth Johnson. He sat down slowly, the paper trembling in his grip, and understood with a wave of dizziness that the woman he had just pulled from the creek, the quiet, careful housemaid who had worked in his family's home for 2 years without either of them knowing, was his half-sister. His mother's daughter. A sister Eleanor had spent her whole life quietly searching for and never found the courage to reach, dying 2 years before Amara had even set foot on the property, never knowing her daughter had unknowingly walked into the very house Eleanor had left her name and her hope inside. And Vanessa had known. Somehow she had found this folder months ago, likely digging through the study for reasons of her own, and she had understood exactly what it meant. If Amara ever discovered the truth, if she ever proved her identity, Eleanor's will, an old, rarely mentioned clause about any biological children unknown to the family at time of death receiving equal inheritance rights, would cut directly into the fortune Vanessa had been counting down the days to marry into. Vanessa hadn't pushed Amara into the creek out of a moment's panic. She had pushed her because she knew exactly who Amara was, and she had been trying, quietly and methodically, to make sure Amara never found out the truth, or never lived long enough to claim it. Daniel sat in his mother's study, holding the letter his mother never sent, and realized the woman he almost married had nearly become something far more dangerous than a liar. The real story, viewers. The real story was only just beginning. Everything changed with just one letter. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after the staff had gone home, the folder open in front of him, reading his mother's unsent letter over and over until the words blurred. He thought about every quiet moment over the past 2 years when he'd passed Amara in the hallway and simply nodded, never once imagining the connection between them. He thought about his mother's strange silences whenever Vanessa's name came up, wondering now if some part of Eleanor had sensed something was wrong with her. Some instinct mothers carry that words can't always explain. He thought too about guilt, a slow, creeping kind. 2 years his half-sister had worked in his home, cleaning up after him, present at every holiday gathering from the edges of the room, and he had never once truly seen her. Not really. Not the way you see family. The next morning, he called Amara into the study, not as her employer, but as something entirely new between them. "I need you to know something," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "And I need you to sit down first." Amara read the adoption papers with her hands trembling, tears welling before she even reached the letter. When she got to the line, "I think of her every single day," she broke down completely, 2 years of unanswered questions crashing over her all at once. Her mother's dying words finally made sense. Ruth had known all those years that Eleanor never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, and had simply run out of time before either of them found the courage to close the distance. "She was your mother too," Daniel said gently. "Which means, you're my sister." The word landed between them like something sacred. Amara pressed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed, grief and joy tangled together in a way she had no name for. Daniel then explained what Vanessa's motive had been. The inheritance clause, the fortune, the wedding 11 days away that Vanessa had been protecting like her life depended on it. Amara's shock deepened into something colder when she understood that Vanessa hadn't just been protecting a secret. She had been willing to let her drown for it. Word of the incident had already reached the household staff by morning, and predictably, it reached Vanessa's family too. By noon, Vanessa arrived at the estate uninvited, dressed down for once, her composure finally cracking under real pressure. "Daniel, please," she said, following him through the foyer. "You have to understand the position I was in. If she came forward, if she proved who she was, everything I planned for, everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together, Vanessa," Daniel said, his voice quiet but absolutely final. "You built a version of me you thought you could control, and a version of my family's fortune you thought you could inherit. That's not a relationship. That's a plan. You're really choosing the maid over me." The words slipped out before Vanessa could stop them, and the ugliness in her voice told Daniel everything he needed to know about who she truly was underneath the polish. "She's not the maid," Daniel said. "She's my sister. And you tried to kill her." Vanessa's face went pale. "I didn't mean for her to actually. I watched you push her into moving water with both hands and then stand there while she struggled," Daniel said. "I don't need to hear what you meant." He called off the wedding that same afternoon. 11 days before what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, Daniel Reeves ended an engagement built on a lie, and began instead the far more difficult and far more meaningful work of getting to know the sister he never knew he had. But the story, viewers, doesn't end there. Because trust, once broken this deeply, doesn't rebuild itself overnight. And Amara had her own fears about stepping into a family and a fortune she never asked to be part of. At first, everything seemed calm again, but calm never lasts long in a story like this. In the weeks following the broken engagement, Daniel moved through his days with a strange new weight. The company still needed him. Board meetings still happened. Investors still called. But underneath all of it sat a quiet, persistent guilt that refused to fade. The sense that he had missed something enormous, right in front of him, for 2 entire years. He invited Amara to move out of the staff quarters and into one of the guest suites in the main house. She refused at first. "I don't want people thinking I did this for money," she told him honestly, sitting stiffly on the edge of a chair that felt too fine for her to sit in. "I don't want to become someone people whisper about. The maid who turned out to be an heiress. I've heard how that story sounds. I don't want to live inside it." Daniel understood her fear more than she realized. He had grown up inside a story too, the golden son of a self-made billionaire, expected to be brilliant and composed at every turn, never allowed to simply be uncertain. He knew what it felt like to have your identity decided by other people before you'd had the chance to decide it yourself. "You don't have to take anything," he told her. "Not the money, not the house, not any of it if that's not what you want. But I'd like the chance to actually know you. Not as staff. Not as an heir. Just as my sister." Amara agreed cautiously to at least try. The early days were awkward in ways neither of them expected. Amara still instinctively reached to clear plates at dinner before catching herself. Daniel still occasionally slipped into giving instructions rather than conversation. They were unlearning 2 years of an unequal relationship neither of them had chosen, built entirely on a secret buried by a mother who died before she could fix it herself. Slowly, though, something real began to grow between them. Daniel learned that Amara had once dreamed of becoming a nurse before her mother's medical bills forced her to leave community college and take whatever work she could find. He learned she still kept a worn photograph of her mother in her wallet, the edges soft from years of handling. He learned she had a sharp, dry sense of humor she'd kept carefully hidden while working in his home, afraid it wasn't her place to be anything but quiet and efficient. Amara, in turn, learned that Daniel wasn't the untouchable, polished figure the business magazines made him out to be. She learned he still kept his mother's reading glasses in his desk drawer, unable to throw them away. She learned he'd been more lonely than anyone around him realized, surrounded by people who wanted something from him and increasingly unsure who, if anyone, simply wanted him. Meanwhile, news of the broken engagement had spread through Vanessa's social circles, and predictably, a version of the story reached the press, though not the true version. Vanessa, in Damage Control, gave a carefully worded interview implying Daniel had become erratic and made an impulsive decision under pressure, never once mentioning the creek, the folder, or the truth about what she'd done. Daniel considered correcting the record publicly and decided against it, at least for now. He didn't want Amara's private story turned into headline entertainment before she was ready. But he made one decision that mattered more than any press statement. He quietly began the legal process to formally and publicly acknowledge Amara as his sister, regardless of what she chose to do with her inheritance. Vanessa, watching from a distance as her carefully built future dissolved completely, was not finished yet. And viewers, what she did next would push this story into territory none of them had prepared for. Nobody could explain what happened next. Not even the family lawyers. 3 weeks after the broken engagement, Vanessa resurfaced with a legal claim that stunned everyone. She hired an aggressive attorney and filed a lawsuit against Daniel for breach of promise and defamation, alleging that Daniel had wrongfully accused her of assault to cover up an inappropriate relationship with a household employee, and had damaged her reputation in doing so. It was, on its surface, a desperate and almost unbelievable move, but Vanessa understood something about public perception that Daniel had underestimated. A wealthy man's word alone isn't always enough. She needed doubt, not truth. The lawsuit forced Daniel's hand. To defend himself and, more importantly, to protect Amara from being publicly painted as either a liar or a gold digger, he would need to bring the full truth into the light. The adoption records, Eleanor's letter, and yes, an account of exactly what happened at the creek that day. Amara was terrified. "If this goes to court, everyone will know," she said one evening, pacing the length of the study where the whole truth had first come to light. "My whole life becomes a headline. People will say I planned this. That I somehow orchestrated finding a rich family." "You didn't plan anything," Daniel said firmly. "You spent 2 years quietly cleaning floors in a house that legally already belonged partly to you, and you never said a word. If anyone's story proves the opposite of a con artist, it's yours." They brought in a legal team of their own, not just corporate lawyers, but a family law specialist experienced in inheritance disputes, along with a private investigator to formally trace and verify the adoption records tied to Eleanor. What the investigation uncovered went even deeper than either of them expected. Eleanor Reeves had, in fact, attempted to locate her biological daughter twice during her lifetime, once when Amara was 9 years old, and again just 8 months before Eleanor's death. Both attempts had been quietly blocked, not by legal barriers, but by a private investigator hired at the time under instructions that traced back, shockingly, to a family associate close to Vanessa's own social circle. A mutual family friend who had, years earlier, been managing certain sensitive matters for the Reeves estate and had apparently decided, without anyone's knowledge, that reuniting Eleanor with an unknown adult daughter carried too much risk to the family's public image and internal finances. In other words, someone inside the family's own trusted circle had deliberately kept Eleanor from finding Amara, years before Vanessa ever entered the picture. Eleanor had died still searching, still hoping, never knowing her efforts had been quietly sabotaged. Daniel sat with this revelation for days, grappling with a new, more complicated grief. His mother hadn't simply failed to find her daughter. She had been stopped. And the failure belonged not to fate, but to people close enough to trust. Vanessa's lawsuit, meanwhile, was quietly falling apart under the weight of what the investigation was uncovering, because in reviewing the timeline, the investigator also found the digital trail proving Vanessa had accessed Eleanor's study and the adoption folder nearly 4 months before the incident at the creek, well before she claimed to have accidentally discovered anything. She hadn't stumbled onto the secret. She had been searching for exactly this kind of leverage from the very beginning of her relationship with Daniel. The lawsuit, once meant to protect Vanessa's reputation, was about to become the very thing that destroyed it completely. Then everything changed, this time in a courtroom. The case never made it to a full public trial. Once Daniel's legal team presented the digital evidence showing Vanessa's early access to the adoption folder, along with witness testimony from the estate's groundskeeper who had watched the entire confrontation by the creek from a distance and had never been asked about it before, Vanessa's attorney recommended she withdraw the lawsuit immediately to avoid a countersuit for assault and attempted concealment of information relevant to an active inheritance matter. Vanessa dropped the case within days. But something else happened during that legal process that mattered far more than any courtroom victory. In preparing testimony, Amara had to formally recount in detail everything her mother Ruth had told her before she passed. The hospital room, the tubes, the shallow breaths, the single name spoken with what little strength Ruth had left. Saying it out loud, in front of lawyers and Daniel and a court reporter typing every word, Amara finally allowed herself to grieve her mother fully for the first time in years. She had spent so long simply surviving, working, paying bills, keeping her head down, that she had never actually let herself feel the full weight of losing the only parent she had ever known. Daniel sat beside her through every session, and in that shared grief, something between them solidified into something unshakable. Not just siblings by blood but family in every way that mattered. With the lawsuit resolved and the truth finally validated by outside legal review, Daniel made a decision that surprised even his own legal team. Rather than quietly settling Amara's inheritance rights behind closed doors, he chose to formally and publicly recognize her as Eleanor Reeves's daughter, updating the family trust documents in a manner that ensured Amara's rightful place. Not because a lawsuit forced his hand, but because it was simply, finally, the right thing to do. He also did something deeply personal. He had his mother's unsent letter framed, and gave it to Amara as a gift. "She wrote this to you," Daniel said, handing it over. "It took 26 years and a lot of pain to get here, but I think she'd want you to have her words, finally, in your own hands." Amara held the frame against her chest and cried in a way that felt, for the first time, like release rather than grief. News eventually reached the public, but by then, the story had shifted entirely in tone. Reporters who had once speculated about a scandal involving a billionaire and his maid were forced to correct the record entirely. This was not a scandal. This was a family broken apart by secrecy and deliberate sabotage decades earlier, finally finding its way back to itself. Vanessa, for her part, disappeared from Chicago's social circles almost entirely within months. Her reputation unable to survive the quiet spread of what had really happened. Daniel never pursued further legal action against her beyond what was necessary to protect Amara. He didn't need revenge. He had gained something Vanessa could never take from him: a sister and the truth. But the story, viewers, wasn't quite finished. Because Amara still had one question left unanswered. One that would take her back to the very beginning of everything. The truth was hiding in plain sight. Amara just hadn't known where to look. Months passed. Amara had gradually settled into a new rhythm, splitting her time between finishing her long-delayed nursing degree, now fully funded, and spending weekends at the estate getting to know a family history she was still learning to claim as her own. She had insisted on continuing her studies rather than simply accepting a life of leisure the inheritance could easily have afforded her. "I want to build something myself too," she told Daniel one afternoon, sitting on the porch overlooking the same creek where everything had nearly ended so violently months earlier. Not instead of this family. Alongside it. Daniel respected that more than she knew. But one question still lingered for Amara, unresolved beneath everything else. Who exactly had blocked Eleanor's search for her all those years ago? The investigation had traced instructions back to a family associate, but the name in the file had been redacted in older archived records, protected by decades-old confidentiality agreements tied to the estate's former legal counsel. Amara decided she needed to know, not for revenge but for closure. She and Daniel worked with their legal team to formally unseal the older estate records, a process that took several more weeks of patience. When the name was finally revealed, it struck both of them harder than they expected. Margaret Ellis, a former close friend of Eleanor's from decades earlier, who had once been like an aunt to Daniel during his childhood. Someone who had quietly stepped back from the family's life shortly after Eleanor's failed second attempt to find Amara, offering no real explanation at the time beyond vague talk of personal matters. Margaret, it turned out, had made the decision unilaterally, believing she was protecting Eleanor from what she saw as a painful, possibly disappointing reunion, and protecting the family's financial structure from what she viewed as unnecessary complication. She had never told Eleanor the truth, that her search had actually succeeded in locating a young Amara, and that Margaret had simply chosen, on Eleanor's behalf, to close the door before Eleanor ever knew it had been opened. Daniel was furious at first, the betrayal cutting deep into a relationship he'd trusted since childhood. But Amara, surprisingly, found herself feeling something closer to sorrow than anger. "She didn't do it out of cruelty," Amara said quietly, reading through the old letters Margaret had eventually sent along with a tearful, private apology once confronted. "She did it because she was scared, and she made the decision alone instead of trusting your mother to make it herself." "That's still wrong," But I understand fear. I understand what it does to people. Daniel chose not to pursue legal consequences against Margaret, though their relationship never fully recovered. Some decisions, once made, leave permanent cracks no apology can completely repair. What mattered more in the end was what Amara did with the answer once she finally had it. She didn't chase anger. She didn't dwell in what could have been if her mother and Eleanor had found each other years earlier, before both of them passed away without ever meeting. Instead, she chose to honor both women the only way she still could, by living fully in the family she had finally found, rather than mourning the reunion that time had stolen from all of them. The past could not be undone. But the future, for the first time in Amara's life, felt entirely her own to build. What happened after that was beyond anything either of them expected. As the first anniversary of the incident at the creek approached, Daniel proposed an idea to Amara that surprised her completely. He wanted to establish a foundation in their mother's name, the Eleanor Reeves Family Foundation, dedicated specifically to helping birth mothers and adopted children reconnect when both parties wished to, offering legal support, search assistance, and financial resources to families who, unlike Eleanor and Amara, still had the chance to find each other in time. "I don't want what happened to us to be just our story," Daniel explained. "I want it to mean something for other families who are still searching, before it's too late for them too." Amara, now in her final year of nursing school and quietly building a career centered on caring for others exactly as her own mother once dreamed, immediately understood the vision. She threw herself into the foundation's early planning with an energy that reminded Daniel powerfully of Eleanor herself. The same quiet determination, the same instinct to help before being asked. The foundation's launch event, held on the anniversary of the day Amara had nearly drowned in that same creek, drew far more attention than either of them anticipated. Amara chose, finally, to speak publicly about her story for the first time, standing at a podium overlooking the very water that had almost taken her life exactly 1 year earlier. "A year ago," she told the crowd, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "I was pulled out of that creek by a stranger who turned out to be my brother. I didn't know that day that I was drowning in more ways than one, not just in water, but in a lifetime of not knowing where I came from, or who was looking for me the whole time without either of us knowing it." She paused, looking toward Daniel in the front row. "My mother told me a name with her last breath, and I spent 2 years too afraid to ask why. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take from this, it's this. Don't wait. Don't let fear keep families apart. Time doesn't wait for any of us to be ready." The foundation's first year exceeded every expectation, reuniting 11 families who had been searching for each other for years, sometimes decades, funding legal searches for birth parents and children who otherwise never would have found the resources to look. Vanessa, watching news coverage of the foundation's launch from a life that had grown noticeably smaller and quieter since the scandal, reportedly reached out once, requesting a private meeting with Daniel. He declined. Some doors, once closed for good reason, are meant to stay closed. Daniel and Amara, meanwhile, had built something far more valuable than the life either of them had originally imagined for themselves. Not a fortune protected by secrecy, but a family rebuilt, deliberately and honestly, out of the wreckage of everything that secrecy had once cost them. But there was one more moment still waiting viewers. The quiet, private ending that mattered more to Daniel and Amara than any headline or foundation launch ever could. This is the moment that changed everything permanently for good. On a quiet Sunday morning nearly 18 months after the day at the creek, Daniel and Amara stood together at Eleanor Reeves's grave, something neither of them had done together before. Amara had visited alone once, quietly, before either of them had known the truth about who they were to each other. This time, she came as a daughter, standing beside her brother, finally able to grieve a mother she had never met but had carried inside her, unknowingly, her entire life. Daniel had brought the framed letter with them, and together, they read Eleanor's unsent words aloud one final time, standing over the headstone as if somehow she could finally hear them. "I think of her every single day," Daniel read quietly. "I hope one day I have the courage to find her." "You did find me, Mom," Amara whispered, kneeling to place a single white flower against the stone. "It just took your other child to finish what you started." They stood there together in silence for a long while, two siblings who had spent 2 years living in the same house as strangers, now standing as family in every sense that mattered, bound not by blood alone, but by the truth they had chosen to uncover, protect, and finally fully embrace. Later that year, Amara graduated with her nursing degree, and Daniel sat in the front row of the ceremony, cheering louder than anyone else in the auditorium, the same way he imagined Eleanor would have had she lived to see this day. Amara took a position at a children's hospital in Chicago, close enough to visit the estate on weekends, close enough to keep building the relationship that fate, sabotage, grief, and finally courage had brought together. The Eleanor Reeves Family Foundation continues its work today, quietly reuniting families who might otherwise have run out of time, exactly as Eleanor herself once ran out of time to find her own daughter. And so, my friend, here is the truth this story leaves us with. Sometimes the people closest to us are hiding the very things that could heal us, not out of cruelty, but out of fear, silence, or circumstances beyond anyone's control. Sometimes the family we're searching for has been standing quietly beside us the entire time, waiting simply to be seen. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop being afraid of the truth, and finally courageously let it in. If this story touched you the way it touched me while writing it, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps this story reach more hearts that need it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more real, emotional stories like this one, because there are so many more waiting to be told. And if you know someone who needs a reminder today that family, real family, is worth fighting for, please share this with them. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.